A female customer berates an employee with Down syndrome, unaware that John Kennedy is watching. The Greenleaf Market sat nestled at the corner of a bustling neighborhood where the hum of passing cars mingled with the chatter of pedestrians weaving through the streets. For Tom, a 22-year-old with Down syndrome, this wasn't just a grocery store, it was a chance to prove himself, to carve out a place in a world that often felt too big, too fast, too unforgiving. Today marked his first day on the job, and his heart thumped with a cocktail of excitement and nerves. Clad in a freshly ironed green uniform, Tom stood before the small mirror in his modest apartment, smoothing the fabric over his chest. "I can do this," he whispered to himself, his voice soft but determined. "I'm going to do great." Yet, as he adjusted his name tag, old memories crept in uninvited like shadows slipping through a crack in the door. He saw himself as a boy, sitting at a worn kitchen table, his former stepfather Carl looming over him. Carl's voice was a blade sharp and cold. "You're a burden, Tom. Don't even dream of amounting to anything." Those words had burrowed deep, leaving scars on Tom's self-esteem that still ached on days like this. But his mother's voice, warm and unwavering, had anchored him that morning before he left. "You're my pride, Tom," she'd said, brushing a hand through his hair. "Just be you." Her words were a lifeline, a beacon, guiding him through the fog of doubt. Now stepping through the automatic doors of Greenleaf, Tom felt the market's energy wrap around him. The air buzzed with the clatter of shopping carts, the faint scent of fresh-baked bread from the bakery section, and the bright glow of fluorescent lights overhead. It was a world alive with motion and sound, both familiar and daunting. Sarah, the store manager, greeted him with a smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes. "Welcome, Tom. Ready to get started. We're thrilled to have you on the team."
Sarah, a middle-aged woman with her hair tied back in a neat ponytail, radiated a kindness that eased the knot in Tom's stomach. He nodded eagerly, his grin wide. "Yes, ma'am. I'll do my very best." Sarah's warmth felt like a promise that he could belong here, that he could make this work. She led him through the aisles, her voice steady as she explained his duties, restocking shelves, assisting customers, and working at the checkout counter. Tom listened intently, his brow furrowed in concentration as he mentally repeated her instructions. "Scan the code bag. The items carefully smile," he murmured to himself, committing each step to memory. Though it took him a little longer to process the details, his enthusiasm shone through, and Sarah noticed. "Take your time, Tom," she said, patting his shoulder. "You're doing great already." Her encouragement was a spark igniting a flicker of pride in his chest. But not everyone shared Sarah's patience. As Tom carefully arranged cans of soup on a shelf, he caught a whisper from Jake, a veteran employee with a sharp jaw and a skeptical glance. "Is he gonna keep up?" Jake muttered to another co-worker, his voice low, but not low enough. "I mean, can he even handle this?" Tom's cheeks flushed, but he kept his eyes on the cans, pretending he hadn't heard. He focused on aligning each label, perfectly determined to prove them wrong. Another co-worker, Lisa, a young woman with a quick smile, was kinder. "Hey, Tom, need a hand? Just shout. If you do, okay," she said, her tone genuine. Tom nodded, his smile returning. "Thanks, Lisa," he replied, his voice soft but grateful. Her small gesture felt like a bridge connecting him to this new world. Amid the market's lively rhythm, a woman entered her presence, slicing through the hum like a discordant note. Helen, in her early 40s, wore a tailored coat that screamed expense, her hair styled with meticulous care. Her posture was rigid, her eyes scanning the store with a disdain that seemed to precede her. She moved with purpose, her heels clicking sharply against the tiled floor as she pushed a cart through the aisles.
When she passed the shelf where Tom was working, her gaze lingered on him, her lips pursing as she watched him methodically check each can. Slow as molasses, she muttered loud enough for Lisa to overhear. Lisa frowned, but said nothing, returning to her own tasks. Tom, absorbed in his work, didn't notice Helen's scrutiny. He was too focused on his next assignment, moving to the checkout counter to assist with bagging. Sarah guided him to a register, showing him how to use the scanner and interact with customers. "Just smile and say, 'Thank you for shopping with us,'" she instructed. Tom nodded, repeating the phrase in his head like a mantra. Standing behind the counter, he felt a swell of pride even as his hands trembled slightly with nerves. He was part of something now, part of the Greenleaf team. As the hours passed, Tom grew more comfortable. He bagged items for a few customers without a hitch, his movements careful but deliberate. An elderly woman, her hands trembling as she handed him her groceries, beamed at him. "You're doing a fine job, young man," she said, her voice kind. Tom blushed, mumbling a shy, "Thank you, ma'am." The compliment warmed him, fueling his determination to keep going. But as his shift neared its end, a sharp sigh from the checkout line broke his focus. Helen, now standing at the back of the queue, crossed her arms, her foot tapping impatiently. Her eyes narrowed as she watched Tom, her expression hardening with every second he took to bag a customer's items. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, her voice carrying a venom that made the air feel heavier. Tom didn't hear her, but he sensed a shift, a tightening in the atmosphere that made his stomach twist. He kept his head down, focusing on the task at hand, unaware of the storm brewing in Helen's gaze. In a quiet corner near the beverage aisle, a man stood, his presence almost invisible amid the market's chaos. Dressed in a simple shirt and a baseball cap pulled low, he blended seamlessly with the crowd. No one would have guessed he was John Kennedy, a figure known for his compassion and quiet strength. He'd come to Greenleaf for a quick errand, but his attention had been drawn to Tom from the moment he entered. There was something about the young man's earnestness, the way he poured himself into every task, that held John's gaze. He stood there, arms crossed, his expression unreadable, but his eyes sharp, taking in every detail. Tom's dedication, his small smiles, his careful movements, they all spoke to John, stirring a sense of recognition. He'd seen people like Tom before, people underestimated, overlooked, yet brimming with potential. John adjusted his cap, his posture relaxed but alert, as if he were waiting for something to unfold. As Tom continued at the checkout, oblivious to Helen's growing impatience, the market's rhythm carried on. Customers chatted, carts rolled, and cash registers beeped, but an undercurrent of tension was building. Helen's sighs grew louder, her foot tapping faster, her eyes boring into Tom like lasers. "Why is this taking so long?" she grumbled, her voice sharp enough to turn heads. Tom, still focused on bagging a customer's groceries, didn't notice her, but the weight of her stare was beginning to press against the edges of his awareness. John Kennedy, still watching from his vantage point, shifted his weight slightly. His eyes flicked from Tom to Helen, then back again. He saw the storm coming, saw the way Helen's impatience was hardening into something cruel. His jaw tightened, but he didn't move yet. He was waiting, observing, as if measuring the moment. The market, alive with its own pulse, seemed to hold its breath, poised on the edge of something significant. Tom, unaware of the eyes on him, Helen's, John's, and those of the customers around him, kept working his hands steady, despite the nervous flutter in his chest. He was determined to finish his first day strong, to show everyone, including himself, that he belonged here. But the air was thick with anticipation, and the stage was set for a collision that would change everything. The Greenleaf Market, usually a symphony of clattering carts, murmured conversations, and the rhythmic beeping of cash registers, felt like it had tilted off its axis. The air grew thick, charged with an unease that seemed to radiate from the checkout line where Tom stood, his hands moving with careful precision as he scanned and bagged groceries. The fluorescent lights above cast stark shadows, amplifying the scrutiny of every eye, now subtly or not so subtly fixed on him. Tom, still riding the fragile wave of confidence from his first successful hours, was unaware of the storm gathering at the end of his line. Helen, the impeccably dressed woman who had entered the store with an air of entitlement, stood there, her arms crossed tightly, her foot tapping a staccato rhythm against the tiled floor. Her lips were pressed into a thin line, her eyes narrowed as they tracked Tom's every move, each deliberate motion seeming to fuel her irritation. To her, Tom's methodical pace wasn't diligence, it was an affront, a personal slight against her tightly scheduled world. She let out a loud theatrical sigh, loud enough to draw glances from nearby customers. "Is this for real?" she muttered, her voice dripping with disdain. "How long does it take to scan a few items?" Tom didn't hear her at first, his focus locked on the barcode of a cereal box, but the weight of her impatience began to seep into the edges of his awareness, making his fingers fumble slightly. He took a deep breath, reminding himself of Sarah's instructions, scan bag, smile. He could do this. He would do this. But Helen's presence loomed like a dark cloud, her sighs growing sharper, her muttered complaints louder. By the time she reached the front of the line, her frustration had hardened into something cruel, something eager to lash out. She slammed her basket onto the counter, the plastic bottles and packaged goods clattering loudly as if the noise could jolt Tom into moving faster. "Come on, let's move it," she snapped, leaning forward, her voice cutting through the hum of the market. Tom looked up, startled, his brown eyes wide with a mix of surprise and uncertainty. He managed a small, polite smile, his voice soft as he said, "Good afternoon, ma'am. I'll get this done for you." But his courtesy only seemed to ignite Helen's irritation further. She rolled her eyes, her hands planted on her hips. "Good afternoon. It won't be if you keep moving like a snail." "Do you even know what you're doing?" The words hit Tom like a slap, his smile faltering. He lowered his gaze to the scanner, his hands trembling slightly as he reached for the first item, a bottle of orange juice. He scanned it carefully, double-checking the screen to ensure it registered, then placed it gently into a bag. But Helen's piercing stare burned into him, her fingers drumming impatiently on the counter. "Unbelievable," she said loud enough for the entire line to hear. "This is what they hire. Someone who can't even handle a basic job." Tom's face flushed a deep red, creeping up his cheeks. He tried to focus, to block out her voice, but her words clawed at him, dragging up memories he'd fought so hard to bury. He saw himself as a boy, cowering at the kitchen table, while Carl, his stepfather, berated him. "You're useless, Tom. A waste of space." The echo of those insults blended with Helen's voice, creating a cacophony in his mind that made his chest tighten. He fumbled with a pack of frozen chicken, his fingers slipping, and the package slid off the counter, landing on the floor with a dull thud. The sound seemed to reverberate through the market, amplifying the moment's humiliation. Helen let out a short, cruel laugh, her eyes glinting with triumph. "Oh, come on! You can't even hold on to a bag of chicken. This is pathetic." She turned to the customers behind her, gesturing dramatically as if inviting them to join her outrage. "Do you see this? We're all stuck here because of him. This is supposed to be a quick checkout." A few customers shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting between Helen and Tom. A middle-aged man in a baseball cap muttered, "She's got a point. It's a bit slow," but his voice lacked conviction, as if he regretted speaking at all. A young woman clutching a reusable tote bag frowned, but said nothing. Her lips pursed in disapproval, not at Tom, but at Helen's venom. Others avoided eye contact, staring at their phones or the floor, unwilling to get involved. One teenager, standing a few spots back, pulled out his phone and started recording, whispering to his friend, "This is intense. She's ripping into him." The murmurs in the line grew louder, a mix of agreement, discomfort, and indecision. But no one stepped forward. Tom, his heart pounding, crouched to retrieve the fallen chicken, his movements jerky with nerves. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said, his voice barely audible, trembling with the effort to hold himself together. He stood, placing the package in the bag, but his hands shook so badly that another item, a box of pasta, slipped from his grasp, hitting the counter with a sharp crack. Helen's laughter rang out again, cold and cutting. "Are you serious? You're a walking disaster." She leaned closer, her voice rising to ensure everyone could hear. "Who hired you? Because this is a joke. You don't belong here if you can't do something as simple as bagging groceries." The words were a blade slicing through Tom's fragile confidence. He felt the eyes of the crowd on him, their silence louder than Helen's taunts. His throat tightened, his vision blurring as he fought back tears. He wanted to respond, to tell her he was trying, that he was doing his best. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, he kept his head down, focusing on the scanner, willing his hands to stop shaking. But Helen wasn't done. She crossed her arms, her voice growing louder, more theatrical, as if she were performing for an audience. "I have places to be, you know. We all do. And you're holding everyone up because you can't keep up. Someone needs to tell you the truth. You're not cut out for this." The accusation hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Tom's breathing grew ragged, his chest heaving as he struggled to stay composed. Another memory flashed through his mind. Carl standing over him, sneering, "You'll never get anything right, boy. You're dead weight." The past and present collided, and Tom felt like he was shrinking, becoming smaller and smaller, until he was nothing at all. He whispered to himself so softly no one could hear, "I just want to help." But the words felt hollow, drowned out by Helen's relentless assault. Across the store, Sarah, the manager, was tied up at the customer service desk, helping an elderly man with a return. She caught a faint echo of raised voices from Tom's checkout line and frowned, her instincts telling her something was wrong. But the man's questions kept her rooted, and she couldn't break away. She glanced toward Tom's station, her brow creasing with worry. But the distance and the crowd obscured her view. Meanwhile, the tension at the checkout grew unbearable. Helen, sensing no resistance, pressed her attack. She pointed at Tom, her voice sharp as a whip. "If you can't do this job, then quit. You're wasting everyone's time, and I'm not going to stand here and deal with incompetence." The word incompetence landed like a punch, and Tom flinched visibly, his shoulders hunching as if to shield himself. The customers in line were no longer just bystanders. Their reactions shaped the scene. A woman in her 30s, holding a toddler's hand, looked visibly upset, whispering to her husband, "This is awful. Someone should stop her." But her husband shrugged, hesitant. "What can we do? She's on a roll." An older man at the back of the line adjusted his glasses, his expression troubled, but he too stayed silent, unwilling to draw Helen's ire. The teenager with the phone kept recording his friend, nudging him. "This is going viral, man. People need to see this." But even their outrage was passive, confined to whispers and screens. Tom felt the weight of their gazes, some pitying, some judgmental, most indifferent, and it crushed him. He tried to keep working, scanning a loaf of bread, but his hands were slick with sweat, and the barcode wouldn't read. The scanner beeped angrily, and Helen seized the moment. "Oh, great! Now the machine's against you too. Give me a break." Her voice echoed through the market, drawing the attention of shoppers in nearby aisles. Tom's eyes stung, but he blinked rapidly, refusing to let the tears fall. He couldn't fall apart. Not here, not now. He had to finish this, had to prove he could do it. But the pressure was a vice squeezing tighter with every second. In the shadows of the beverage aisle, John Kennedy stood, his presence still unnoticed by the crowd. He had moved closer, blending into the edge of the line, his baseball cap casting a shadow over his face. His arms were crossed, his posture calm, but his eyes were locked on the scene with an intensity that belied his relaxed demeanor. He saw the hurt in Tom's face, the way his shoulders slumped under Helen's barrage. He saw the crowd's inaction, their collective failure to intervene. His jaw clenched, a subtle sign of the resolve forming within him. John had witnessed injustice before, had felt the sting of silence when someone needed a voice. He wasn't the type to act impulsively, but he knew this moment was tipping toward a breaking point. He took a step forward, then another, his movements measured, but purposeful. Helen, oblivious to his approach, continued her tirade. "I'm going to speak to the manager," she declared, her voice ringing with authority. "You shouldn't be here, and I'll make sure they know it. This is unacceptable." The threat sent a jolt through Tom, his eyes widening with fear. Losing this job, this chance was unthinkable. It was more than a paycheck. It was his shot at independence, at proving to himself and his mother that he could stand on his own. His hands froze on the scanner, his breath hitching as panic crept in. The market seemed to close in around him, the lights too bright, the voices too loud. The murmurs of the crowd grew a low hum of unease, but still, no one acted. The teenager's phone kept rolling, capturing every cruel word, every tremble in Tom's hands. The woman with the toddler took a hesitant step forward, then stopped, her courage faltering. The older man at the back of the line muttered, "Someone ought to do something," but his words dissolved into the air. Helen, emboldened by the lack of opposition, leaned over the counter, her voice dropping to a venomous hiss. "You're an embarrassment. Do us all a favor and walk away." Tom's vision blurred, his heart hammering so loudly he could barely hear anything else. He felt like he was drowning, the weight of her words pulling him under. But then, from the corner of his eye, he caught a movement, a figure stepping closer, a shadow breaking through the haze. John Kennedy was no longer in the background. His steps were steady, his gaze unwavering, and the air around him seemed to shift, carrying a promise of change. The market, poised on the edge of chaos, held its breath, sensing that the storm was about to break. The Greenleaf Market had become a pressure cooker, the air thick with tension that seemed to pulse with every heartbeat. Helen's voice, sharp and unrelenting, echoed through the aisles, her words like daggers aimed at Tom, who stood frozen behind the checkout counter. His hands trembling as he clutched a bag of groceries. Her latest threat, "I'll make sure you're out of here," hung in the air, a guillotine poised to sever Tom's fragile hope. The customers in line, a mix of uncomfortable onlookers and silent accomplices, shifted restlessly, their murmurs a low hum of unease. Some clutched their phones, recording the spectacle, while others averted their eyes, unwilling to challenge the storm that was Helen. Tom's world had shrunk to the counter before him, the scanner's red light blurring as tears stung his eyes. He felt small, exposed, the weight of Helen's cruelty, and the crowd's inaction crushing him. The market's usual vibrancy, the chatter, the clink of coins, the rustle of bags had dulled, replaced by a suffocating silence that amplified every one of Helen's barbs. Then, cutting through the haze like a beacon, came a voice calm, steady, and commanding. "That's enough." The words weren't loud, but they carried a weight that silenced the murmurs, turning every head toward their source. John Kennedy stepped forward from the edge of the crowd, his presence unassuming, yet magnetic. His simple shirt and baseball cap made him blend in, but the authority in his posture and the fire in his eyes demanded attention. He moved with purpose, each step deliberate, closing the distance to the checkout line. Helen, caught off guard, spun to face him, her expression a mix of irritation and confusion. "Excuse me, who do you think you are?" She snapped, her voice faltering slightly, as if sensing the shift in the room. John stopped a few feet from the counter, his gaze locked on Helen, unwavering but not aggressive. "I'm someone who knows right from wrong," he said, his tone even but firm. "And what you're doing right now, tearing into this young man for no reason other than your own impatience, is wrong." The market seemed to hold its breath, the silence deepening as his words settled over the crowd. Helen blinked, her confidence cracking, but she rallied, jutting out her chin. "I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. He's too slow and it's holding us all up. I have every right to be frustrated." John tilted his head slightly, a faint smile touching his lips, though his eyes remained intense. "You have a right to feel frustrated. You don't have a right to humiliate someone who's doing their job, trying their best. There's a difference between speaking your mind and using your words to hurt." His voice was like a steady current pulling the crowd along, shifting their perspective. Tom, still clutching the bag, looked up, his wide eyes meeting John's. For the first time since Helen's onslaught began, he felt a flicker of relief, as if someone had thrown him a lifeline. The customers who had been passive spectators began to stir. A woman in her 40s holding a basket of produce nodded slowly, whispering to the person beside her. "He's right. She's gone too far." A young man, still filming on his phone, muttered, "Wait, is that John Kennedy?" The recognition spread like wildfire, gasps and whispers rippling through the line. Helen, sensing the tide turning, crossed her arms tighter, her voice rising in defiance. "This isn't your business. I'm a paying customer, and I deserve better service than this." She gestured at Tom, who flinched, his shoulders hunching. But John didn't waver. He took another step closer, his presence grounding the chaos. "It's everyone's business when someone's being treated unfairly," he said. "This young man is here to help you, and you've chosen to make his day harder than it needs to be. Kindness costs nothing, but you've decided to spend your energy on cruelty instead." The words landed like a thunderclap, and Helen's face flushed, her bravado crumbling. She opened her mouth to retort, but the growing murmurs of the crowd drowned her out. The woman with the produce basket spoke up, her voice clear. "You don't speak for all of us. He's doing fine, and you're the one making this difficult." An older man, who had been silent until now, added, "We're all waiting." "You're not special. Leave the kid alone." The support, tentative at first, gained momentum, voices overlapping in a chorus of agreement. John turned to Tom, his expression softening. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice gentle like a hand extended in friendship. Tom, his throat tight, managed to whisper, "Tom, sir." John smiled, a warmth in his eyes that made Tom's chest loosen. "Tom, you're doing a great job. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. We all have tough moments, but they don't define us. You understand?" Tom nodded, his eyes glistening, a tear escaping despite his efforts to hold it back. John placed a hand on the counter, leaning in slightly. "You're stronger than you know, Tom. Keep going." The simple act of acknowledgement, of being seen, was a balm to Tom's wounded spirit. Helen, now visibly rattled, tried to salvage her stance. "This is ridiculous," she huffed, snatching her bags. "I don't need to stand here and be lectured." She turned to leave, but the crowd's disapproval followed her, their gazes heavy with judgment. As her heels clicked toward the automatic doors, the sound faded into irrelevance, overshadowed by the shift in the market's energy. Sarah, the manager, finally broke free from the customer service desk, hurrying toward the checkout. Her face was etched with concern as she took in the scene. "Tom, are you okay?" she asked, her voice thick with guilt for not intervening sooner. Tom nodded, managing a small smile. "I'm okay, Ms. Sarah. Thank you." Sarah turned to John, her gratitude evident. "Sir, thank you for stepping in. That was incredible." John waved off the praise, his focus still on Tom. "It's about doing what's right," he said simply. He leaned toward Tom again, lowering his voice. "I once knew someone who faced a moment like this, someone who was judged before they had a chance to shine. I learned that if we don't stand up, nothing changes. Today, I stood up for you, Tom. One day, you'll stand up for yourself, and you'll be unstoppable." The words sank deep, planting a seed of confidence in Tom's heart. The crowd, now fully engaged, began to interact with Tom differently. The woman with the produce basket handed him her items, smiling warmly. "You're doing great, Tom. Keep it up." The older man, now next in line, added, "You've got more grit than most, son. Don't let anyone dim that." Their words, small but sincere, were like bricks rebuilding Tom's sense of worth, one at a time. The market, once a place of judgment, transformed into a community. Customers who had been strangers moments ago now exchanged nods and smiles, united by a shared moment of humanity. The teenager with the phone still recording approached Sarah, his excitement palpable. "This needs to go online. People have to see what happened here. How Tom kept going. How this guy stood up for him." Sarah hesitated, then nodded. "Let's make sure Tom's okay with it first," she said, glancing at him. Tom, catching her eye, gave a shy nod, a spark of pride in his expression. As Tom's shift ended, he walked to the break room. His steps slow but lighter than before. He sat on a bench, staring at his uniform, replaying the day's events. For so long he'd felt invisible, defined by his mistakes or his differences. But today, something had shifted. John's words, "You're stronger than you know," echoed in his mind, mingling with his mother's encouragement. He felt a flicker of belief in himself, a flame that hadn't been there before. Outside, John Kennedy slipped quietly toward the parking lot, unnoticed by the crowd now buzzing with conversation. He didn't seek recognition. For him, this was just a moment of doing what he believed was right. Before getting into his car, he glanced back at the market, a faint smile on his lips. He knew the impact of his actions would linger, not for him, but for Tom, and perhaps for everyone who'd witnessed it. By the next day, the video of the incident had spread across social media, shared by thousands, then millions. Hashtags like #StandWithTom and #KindnessWins trended, sparking discussions about respect and empathy. Strangers left comments praising Tom's resilience and John's compassion, while others shared their own stories of overcoming judgment. The market became a symbol of change, a place where a single act had rippled outward, touching lives far beyond its walls. Tom, unaware of the viral storm, returned to Greenleaf for his next shift. The moment he walked in, customers greeted him with smiles, some calling him by name. Lisa, his co-worker, gave him a playful nudge. "You're kind of a celebrity now, Tom," she teased. Jake, the skeptical co-worker, offered a sheepish nod, his earlier doubts softened. Sarah pulled Tom aside, her eyes bright. "I'm proud of you, Tom. You showed everyone what you're made of." Tom smiled, a real smile, one that reached his eyes. He stepped behind the checkout counter, his hands steady now, his heart full. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing: he wasn't alone anymore. The market, once a battleground, was now his stage, and he was ready to shine.